right, so you should be able to see my slides, yes. And today we're going to talk about, I think anyway, so I'm biased, but I think this is probably one of the most interesting topics nowadays, considering that we are teachers and I feel that many of us here are actually nerds. That's why we became teachers in the first place. I don't know if that's your case. It's certainly my case, and we enjoy reading. But there has been a crisis, I might add, when it comes to reading. And I think my mission here is to remind all of you how important reading is, not just in terms of developing critical thinking, even self-regulation and metacognitive skills, but especially when it comes to second language acquisition or learning. And we are going to talk a little bit about the difference, but not in very technical terms, I suppose. And hopefully you will have a clear or clearer anyway idea by the end of the session of what you can do to help your students become readers, better readers, avid readers, as I like to call them, like my dad used to be. My dad was an avid reader. And I remember coming home after school and actually seeing my dad sitting in his favorite armchair, holding a book in his hands. And that really encouraged me to also want to read. And I know this probably happened to many of you. You probably got inspired by looking at someone in your family, maybe, or your circle of friends reading. And then maybe you said, why shouldn't I read? Right. So I should do the same. Anyway, we're going to talk about all of that. And I just wanted to thank eFuture for hosting me here. I've been working with eFuture for a while now, and I'm very glad I met Sue in Mexico as well. So Mexico has been very nice to me. A lot of great friendships and amazing work opportunities, and also learning more about people. Right. So, are you familiar with this image of the three monkeys here? I think this is a classic image, right? So I want to ask you, folks, what comes to mind when you look at this image of the three monkeys, The first monkey covering its ears, the second one its eyes, and the second one its mouth. What does that symbolize? You can use the chat to interact with me. Let's see. Deaf, blind, dumb. Ignorance, exactly, Nicolas. Yes. Let's see. Let's wait for more people to share what they think. Okay. Don't be shy, folks, okay? Anything you answer will be a valid answer. So what comes to mind when you look at this image? Okay, no more answers? I'll give you another. Okay. Yes, inability to communicate, Danielle. Hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. Exactly, good. All skills are necessary to learn. Yes, excellent answers. I believe this, besides ignorance, not caring, wonderful. It refers to human behavior. Yes, Valeria. Yes, perfect. All of your answers are great. Awesome contributions, everyone. I wanted to bring this image in particular because I think this is sort of what's happening nowadays when it comes to reading. I think a lot of us educators and teachers really working in the classrooms directly with our students, and of course educators at other levels of education, we bought this idea, this narrative that, well, since we have other technologies available today, reading is not so important, or maybe reading is not the protagonist anymore. It's not something that we should worry so much about because we can learn so much faster by just watching a video or looking at an image, an infographic or whatever it is. That I am concerned with that. And I'm going to show you some results. I'm going to show you some of the current scenarios around the world. I'm going to talk more specifically about our side of the world, Latin America, because we can actually see the results now of this narrative. So reading is secondary. Well, we can, watch a video. There are many tutorials on YouTube, right? That's not how it goes. And we will understand why. So this is what we're going to follow. The first thing I really want to address is becoming a reader. So when did we become readers? Yeah, audiobooks as well, Maria Isabel. Yes. Even though they are a great option, it's different, biologically or neurophysiologically speaking. Reading and listening, they're different things. And I'm going to use my brain today, not just this brain that I have, but I'm going to stop sharing to show you that I actually have another brain. I have an extra brain to show you that those are very different skills, and they complement each other, but we have to practice them separately and also all together. And listening to audiobooks is not going to help you with reading as much as you think. It's going to help you with acquisition of knowledge, sure. But reading is a different process that we also have to go through if we want to make our brains super potent. Okay. So my brain is here to prove the point. All right. So we're going to talk about becoming a reader. So when did we become readers as human beings? And then we're going to move on and talk about reading in the brain. So what does the science of reading know nowadays? What can it tell us? Then we're going to address this, what I like to call the reading crisis around the world, especially in Latin America. Again, I'm going to focus here. And the next topic is something that took me a while to come up with because I want to send a message of hope, out there. So salvaging reading. So how do we rescue reading so that our students can read more, can read better, and can actually help themselves become more fluent, more proficient speakers of English, for example. And then we're going to talk about graded readers. I'm going to talk about a couple of solutions that are possible, things that you can do using some of the portfolio here at eFuture, or using something you might have, some resources you own, your school may make available to students. And finally, we can discuss takeaways. So you tell me what was interesting about the session, if there are any other things you would like to know. So we can have a couple of minutes at the end for a Q&A session. So you can ask me questions, all right? Okay, now tell me, I think everyone here is familiar with this man. Have you ever heard of Carl Sagan? Yes or no? Use the chat. I'm curious. Okay, yes, Carl Sagan. So when Joseph was introducing me, he mentioned Learning Cosmos, which is my brand, my consulting business, let's say. And I don't know if it was evident or obvious to you. I actually got inspired by, I remember watching the TV show many, many years ago that was called Cosmos, and it was actually hosted by this man here, Carl Sagan. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Carl Sagan, Cosmos, yeah. So he was an astrophysicist, right? A science advocate. I think he was a brilliant man. I love the way he spoke about things so passionately in such an intelligent way, right? And there was an episode of Cosmos that he recorded inside a wonderful library. And I remember that he said, what an amazing thing a book is, right? We can look at those squiggles, those symbols, and we can understand, or we can have a conversation with someone who may have been dead for thousands of years, a direct conversation inside that person's minds because they have left, their legacy behind through writing. And then he wraps up that part of the conversation by saying, books break the shackles of time. A book is proof that humans are capable of working magic. That's amazing, right? I remember when I wrote my first book, The Owl Factor, that I started reading a lot of Western philosophy, Greek philosophy, and I went back to Plato, Xenophon, the disciples, the followers of Socrates. And then every time I stopped and thought about what I was doing, it kind of made me wonder, like, how amazing is it that I'm actually reading something that was written thousands of years ago and it's still relevant today? And somebody actually took the time to write it down and pass on, from generation to generation, and it's still valid today. And I think this is the magic that is kind of it's losing. We're losing this sort of magic because we are now in an era of distractions, of other things, other types of technology. And I think that we have to salvage, like I said, rescue this amazing magic, which is reading a book. Reading a book is magic, folks. So I want to ask you something. Take a guess. How long have human beings been reading? If you had to take a guess, how many years have we been reading? Hundreds, thousands? What do you think? I know it's a difficult question, but help me out here. Let's see. I'll give you 30 seconds to think. Nicolas said thousands of years. Yeah. Yeah, Daniela. Daniela is here. Hello, Daniela. Good. So, thousands of years. Exactly, right? Yeah, less than 2,000 years. Yeah, many, many years from symbols, pictures, since always, I think. Yeah, amazing. Actually, there's research about that. And I have a book here. Maybe I can show you the book. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, it's somewhere. I have too many books here. Yeah. Oh, we can see it there. So it's How Language Began by Daniel Everett. Daniel Everett is a very interesting American linguist who came to Brazil in the 1960s and 70s and worked with an indigenous community called the Pirahan. And they have a very unique language. And he started learning more about how languages develop, how languages evolve. And he wrote this very interesting book about how, quite possibly, the first hominin or hominid to actually speak, to use spoken language, was Homo erectus. Homo erectus, okay? Do you still remember that from your history classes, or I don't know, anthropology or paleontology, archaeology? So Homo erectus was around actually almost 2 million years ago. And there's very compelling evidence showing that maybe Homo erectus was the first hominin to speak, to utter the first words. Look at that. And then after that, we had other types of hominids, like the Neanderthals, for example. And then we, Homo sapiens, we've been around for about 200,000, 300,000 years. Our brain has not changed really in terms of biology in all that time. So it's very safe to say that we've always had this capability of speaking since we've been around. So we've been speaking for at least 200, 300,000 years. But what about reading? Well, if we look at historical records, reading came much, much, much later. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you remember this from your history lessons. I was a history nerd. I love this, okay? So the Sumerians were probably the first people to come up with a writing system. Remember the cuneiform writing? They used, clay tablets, and they actually found recipes for bread and beer and things like that. And that goes back to, I'd say, 3,500 BC. So that means that we've been writing. Some people have written actually, but as a society, as a human community, we've been writing for about 6,000 years, maybe 5,000 years, and different communities, different civilizations actually created different writing systems at different times. Some of them were a little bit older. They had very unique characteristics. But I mean, we've been speaking for 200,000, 300,000 years, and we've been writing for about 6,000 years. That's a huge difference, right? Now, the question I have for you here before I move on, and then we can focus on that. Why is that so? Why is it that we can speak more easily, let's say, more naturally than write? Does anybody want to take a guess? Does it have to do with how easy it is or how natural it is? What do you think? Why did writing and consequently reading come much later when we look at our evolutionary history? Any idea? Speaking spontaneous, right, Juan? Yes. Yeah, you're on to something, Juan. Exactly, right? I'm gonna, it requires tools, right? Exactly. So writing depends on other things, external tools. And speaking is just our biology, right? Our vocal apparatus and everything. Yes, exactly, Daniela. Immediate needs, right? So if we can talk to one another, give instructions, record things, that's good enough. But then as societies and civilizations became more and more complex, and we had to actually record large amounts of, everything, like information, then we need a system to handle that, right? And writing comes exactly as a consequence of that. So we had an agricultural revolution, right? So now we had to deal with numbers, with quantities. We had to record things so that we can remember. And our biology cannot handle that. It's too much information. Yes, Matteo, because writing requires structure and organized thinking. There you go. You guys are awesome. Well done. I am enjoying all your contributions. So I think everyone agrees that reading is recent in human history. And because it is recent, we can assume that it's harder or it requires something else, something extra for it to actually happen. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this, but I think as English teachers, I can right now say that we see that happening in a way, and that's funny, in a way that goes against what I've just told you. Are you familiar with this division or this categorization that we have for productive skills and receptive skills? So let's do a quiz here. What are the two productive skills that we teach in the classroom? Productive skills. Let's see. Yes, very good, Martha. And consequently, what are the two receptive skills that we teach? The other two receptive skills. There you go, Daniela. Yes, listening and reading. So intuitively, you should think, okay, receptive skills are the easy ones, because the students are more passive, right? They receive whatever, the content through listening or reading, and they decode that and they can understand. So that's easy. It should be easier. So if it should be easier, why did it show up much later? In terms of history or evolution when compared to speaking, which is a productive skill, right? Isn't that a paradox? Actually, no. I will tell you why, But, and this goes back to this American psychologist. So his name is David Geary, and he talked about two different types of knowledge and how we acquire or learn, because here we can actually make that distinction. Stephen Krashen made the distinction between acquisition and learning, right? So acquisition is more subconscious, it's more implicit, right? It's more about exposure. I am there, I am exposed to whatever is happening and I acquire that. I learn sub or unconsciously, right? And learning is more formal, more explicit. It requires more work and so on, right? And this is pretty much what David Geary had said, but in different terms. So he says, there are certain things that we just have to be around them and we just acquire them without much effort. I mean, there's a lot of effort, but we don't have to go to a specialized place like a school to learn that. And he calls that biologically primary knowledge. So guess what? Speaking is considered biologically primary knowledge. I don't have to go to school to learn how to speak any language. As you know, somebody who was born in Brazil, was surrounded by Portuguese speakers. I picked up the language. That's acquisition, right? Same thing with listening. I actually picked up the language through listening. I was just listening to people talk around me, and that's biologically primary knowledge. But biologically secondary knowledge is the type of knowledge that has been collectively constructed throughout history, and then it requires some sort of formal, or let's say more, I would say not just formal but explicit. I don't necessarily have to go to school to learn it, but I need to be in touch with someone who has acquired or has learned that before. So it usually requires school, some kind of schooling. For example, for you to learn how to read and write, then you got to go to school. That's how most of us, if not all of us, learned how to read and write. Am I right? Yes or no? Is that how you learned how to read and write? Did you have to go to school? Maybe your parents gave you, a few tips and taught you some things, but most of it was from school, I think, right? And that means that this type of knowledge is more specific, more complex. It was built collectively throughout history. Okay. And why is that distinction important? Because what I'm trying to say, and I want you to look me in the eye when I say that, so I'm going to stop sharing. Reading takes more effort than speaking. Let me say that again. Reading takes more effort than speaking. Okay. Okay, does that make sense to you folks? Yes or no? So reading takes effort. It's difficult. It's more difficult. And speaking comes naturally to us, okay? You might think in terms of, okay, a second language or an additional language, like, okay, but speaking in an additional language is very difficult as well. Yes, absolutely. I'm not saying it's easy, but reading, it might be actually easier for you to read in a second language than to speak the second language, because you can pretty much understand by inferring a few things. You look at cognates, for example, me reading in Spanish, I can read 90%. I can understand 90% of Spanish in books, okay? When I'm talking to people in Mexico, my Spanish has been getting better, but I'm still using a lot of portuñol, right? But still, um, what I'm trying to say is that reading does not come naturally. It is something that we have learned how to do because of how we evolved as human beings and how we've actually created this thing collectively. So throughout many, many years. Now, let me try to prove that point. I want you to think very hard and answer this. Okay. And I actually want the title. So no cheating, all right? What was the last book you read? Yeah, share the title here in the chat. The last book you read. Let's see. Angel Down. Okay, Angel Down. Let's see. Cool. Oh, very good, Daniela. That's a good one. Pet Cemetery. Okay. Very good. Let's see. Some people are struggling to remember, right? The Heart of Jesus. Probably Basuras, okay, which is a graphic novel from a Colombian author, okay. Oh, interesting, okay. Las Cartas de Relación de Hernán Cortés. Wow, awesome, Jonathan. I wouldn't expect anything less from you. That's great. Sounds good. Amazing. Okay, El Murmullo de las Abejas. Very interesting, Berta. Oh, I can see Berta is here now. So, I assume that, let's see, and I don't know if you can answer this, but I assume that you probably don't read every day, right? Do you read every day? The Historian by Elena Koloskova. Okay, awesome. Is there anyone here who's such an avid reader that actually reads every day? And I'm talking about literary books, okay? I'm not talking about the cereal box or subtitles. I'm talking about books, actual books. Okay, I do because I'm a nerd, okay? Yeah, this is not the question I should be asking you. I'm talking to a crowd of nerds, to to teachers, educators, right? But I think everyone here probably agrees that most people don't read every day, literary books. But I would say most people speak every day. We talk to someone every day, where we are on the phone, face to face, right? My job is related with reading books. Yes, Mateo, exactly. So I'm glad I'm talking to avid readers here. So reading is certainly something that takes a little bit more effort. It requires time. It requires patience, especially if you're reading literary books, or even if you're reading nonfiction books. If you're reading, philosophy manuals, or if you're reading biographies, or if you're reading whatever the genre is, it takes time. It's something that it's an acquired habit, right? A lot of people say that they wish they read more, right? I said that many times as well, and I'm saying that because I want you to think really, and I'm going back to my slide here. I want you to think about this. Uh, Reading has to do with this term literacy. And what is the best translation for literacy? So I don't know how it works in Spanish or whatever other language you speak here, but I wanted to show you something that I think is actually quite useful from Brazil. I'm going to talk about the translation of literacy to Portuguese, and then we're going to talk about the science of reading. But for those of you who are interested in learning more about literacy, there are some very interesting figures, statistics from around the world, initiatives on this website, UNESCO. Okay, so you can go to UNESCO, Google UNESCO literacy. If you want, I can share the link with you later, no problem at all. And you will have a better idea of what's going on around the world. I don't know if you knew this, but there are around 800 million illiterate people around the world, okay? 800 million. If you think about it, it's not too bad, actually. I think we have made a huge progress in terms of access to reading. And I'm going to show you some statistics from Latin America, but it's still, it's a lot of people. I mean, in terms of the world population, okay, but it's still a lot of people who cannot read, right? And why do I want to show the Portuguese translation? Because we actually have different terms to explain or to talk about literacy, different levels of literacy. And I think this might be similar in Spanish. I think some of you who speak Spanish can probably understand what's written here, right? Yeah? Alfabetização, letramento, and literacia. So literacy can be translated into three different words in Portuguese, okay? Does anybody have any idea what they mean? Especially alfabetização. So what is that referring to? Does anybody know? I'll give you 30 seconds to think. If you do not share anything, I'll tell you, okay? Reading and writing. Yeah, alfabetização. To be able to read and write. Yeah. So alphabetização actually relates to the alphabet, right? And it's basically decoding. Alphabetização has to be with decoding, being able to break those words, actually figure out the letters and what they mean, the syllables, and then work at the word level. So alphabetização, the way I see it, has to do with the building blocks. And this is what happened to us when we begin to read, when we go to school, or we might begin at home. So when we learn how to put one letter after another letter, and so on, and build words, morphology, right? Exactly, Carlos. Yes. To empower someone with skills of writing and reading to become knowledgeable. Exactly. So that's alfabetização. Letramento gets to, let's say a higher level. So letramento is actually the wall. If alfabetização is it relates to building blocks, the letramento relates to the wall, actually looking at, and the interesting thing is that you don't just have one type of letramento or one type of literacy. Nowadays, for some time now, we've been talking about scientific literacy, AI literacy, digital literacy, right? Visual literacy. So literacy is really your competency of being able to understand the world, the natural phenomena, or whatever is happening from different lenses, different perspectives, right? That's literacy. It's the wall. Letramento in Portuguese, okay? And literacia is the blueprint, okay? So literacia, we now use as an academic term to talk about how to study or how to actually understand the best way to alphabetize. We shouldn't use that word in English, right? But give or empower students with the skill of decoding words, letters, and actually be able to read and write the first level, and also help them read the world through different lenses, using different competencies, using different resources, not just text, but images, AI, and whatever, right? So that's what literacia helps us understand. So it's the academic field that can give us insights as educators so we can make decisions. We can teach our students better. And this last level of literacia or literacy, and literacy in Portuguese, has everything to do with my talk today. Because where do you get information about the best way to teach reading and writing? So, where does it come from? It comes from the science of learning. Okay, folks? The science of learning, and more specifically, a branch that is the science of reading. And it's been around for a while. So, be honest with me. How many of you had heard of the science of reading before this talk? Are you familiar with the term science of reading? Or is it the first time? Because you are all nerds and teachers, I assume many of you have heard this, but maybe some of you haven't. Science of reading. Are you familiar? Let's see, let's see. Don't be ashamed, it's always good to learn something. If you have never heard of it, some people haven't heard of it. That's great. So now you know about it. Now you will become experts. Okay? Not experts, but you will be able to understand a few things. You will become literate, let's say, in the science of reading so that you can become experts later. Okay? Ah, Bertha learned from me. Wonderful. So, well, this is what this man, Stanislas Dehaene, said in his book. He wrote an amazing book, and the title is Reading in the Brain. And he said, Emperor Huangdi, or De, I don't know which tone is because my Chinese is not that great anymore. So around 2600 BC, one of his ministers, Zheng Jie, decided that the footprints left in the dirt by various bird species constituted a small set of easily recognizable shapes, and he used them to create the first Chinese characters. I think this is amazing. And I think this is even more amazing because I had the opportunity to go there. I was in China last year. I started learning Chinese, and I took my fierce travel buddy that many of you have met, and he is an elephant called Mr. Trunk. So I know that many people in Mexico are familiar with Mr. Trunk. He travels around the world. I think he's been to 40 countries. And here's proof of Mr. Trunk right in front of the Chinese Character Museum in Anyang. That's the name of the city, Anyang, in the province of Henan, if my pronunciation is correct. Henan, all right? This is where I lived for 2 months. as I was a teacher at Anyang Preschool Education College, and I was teaching first and second year pedagogy students, preschool education. So I was talking about learning theories and things like that. But as a geek and nerd, of course, I had to go visit the museum. And because I was the only foreigner, everywhere I went, I was the only foreigner. I became a mini celebrity. So a lot of people asked to take pictures with me. There were school excursions there, people touring inside the museum, and the kids, they went nuts when they saw me. They wanted to have a picture, right? See? Anyway, one of the things that I learned that day was that the Chinese people wrote on what they called an oracle bone. So it was a turtle bone. So they carved the pictograms or the characters. You say they were not the characters that we have today, but they were, they were like indexes that resembled what they were talking about. So they carved those things onto the bone to ask for, let's say, a good hunt, or to get married, or to recover from illness, or things like that. And you can actually see how clearly things have evolved since then. Okay, so you can see that because Chinese is a very pictographic language, so it maintains some of its roots, right? Which I think is fascinating, by the way. So ear is R. I think it's R. Does anybody speak Chinese here? Horse is ma, right? Fish, I think is yu. I think it's yeah. Which tone is it? Going up, yu. Mountain is shan, so it's the first tone. And cloud is yun, I think. Anyway, I don't know if my Chinese is correct, but I think this is fascinating. And it shows that reading and writing, because they are inherently connected, they really take a lot of work. They are not easy. They're not so natural as we might think. It actually took a lot of work for them to evolve and to be available to us nowadays in different times, different civilizations. And I want that to be a reminder, because we were not wired, biologically speaking, neuroscientifically speaking, to read. According to Stanislas Dehaene, actually, he said nothing in our evolution could have prepared us to absorb language through vision. Yet, brain imaging demonstrates that the adult brain contains fixed circuitry exquisitely attuned to reading. I think that's phenomenal. It is amazing. As a matter of fact, in the same book, he introduces us to the science of reading. So, how the brain reads. So, there are specialized areas that were basically, they served as decoding images or facial expressions, and then we recycled them to understand letters, symbols, ideograms, characters. So there's this very interesting area in red that he calls the brain's letterbox, that is specialized in that, in understanding letters as they form words. Okay, how cool is that? And here's the thing: according to this, and this is the science of reading, that means that we do not process at the word level. We process at the letter level. It's the brain's letter box, right? So as I assume all of us here are very proficient readers. It kind of feels like when we're reading something, we just look at a word and we got it, right? So we don't have to decode each letter individually, but we just do it very fast. That's what we do. And what does that say about teaching kids how to read? So, according to this science of reading, and I got this very interesting image here from We Are Teachers, there are five important pillars. The first pillar is phonemic awareness. Some countries, like, I know this is happening in Latin America, I know it's happening in Brazil, they do not alphabetize, teach the decoding part, the first level of literacy in the right way. They're teaching at the word level. That's not how the brain learns how to read. The brain learns how to read at the letter level, decoding each letter, each sound, and actually that's the thing, the equivalency, so the sound and the letter. That's why the the phonics or phonic method is the most appropriate to help those children become good readers. They have to learn the building blocks first. If they cannot do that, the whole reading experience will be compromised. That's why when you're teaching, that's why there are many, many interesting resources at eFuture, that deal with phonics, for example. If you're teaching your students how to pronounce, I don't know, the difference between M and N, right? And then this type of activity is essential for children to learn how to read. Does that make sense? And I know because I visited a lot of schools here in Brazil, even in Mexico and Peru, I visited schools. We are not doing this the right way. Many schools are actually teaching or focusing at the word level. So first we have to work with the separate letters, the separate sounds, and then put them together so that kids learn how to decode. So they have to learn the code, not the line of the code, but the code, each individual symbol, right? So phonemic awareness. So what do those letters and syllables sound like? Then vocabulary, then fluency, then phonics, then comprehension, right? So those are the 5 pillars of literacy according to the science of learning. And I think that we're doing things wrong because we're not devoting a lot of time using the right method for alphabetization, the first level of literacy. Yes, exactly. Sue is going to talk about phonics. Perfect. That's the best way to make people learn how to read and write, according to the science of reading. Okay. And now Sue can say that also when she delivers her talk. That's it. And they have to learn how to decode how the letters are pronounced, individually in syllables and so on, so that they can learn the building blocks and then they can build the wall. Remember the wall, letramento? That's more complex, right? And nowadays, still today, we have a lot of people who don't know how to read and write very well in Brazil, even though it's much better, it has been improving because of that lack of skill or competency decoding the letters. Okay. Now, why is that important? Because this, even though this is good news, exciting news, if you think about Latin American countries are approaching full literacy. I talked about that couple of maybe more than a year ago. I was doing a webinar here for eFuture as well, and I talk about comic books. So that's good news. That means that more than, or very close actually, to 90% of the population of Latin America can read and write. But that's also fake news in a way, because it doesn't tell us the level of reading and writing. A lot of those people who can read and write, they're just operating at the first level, alfabetização, alphabet. They can decode, they understand the words, but very limited. So they are what we call, in Brazil, we have a name for them, analfabetos funcionais, okay? Yeah. So functional illiterate people. So they can function to read very superficially, sign their names, but there's no text interpretation there. They don't get stuff. And they're very literal. So pragmatics, if you change the context, if you work with figurative speech like irony, sarcasm, things like that, they don't get it. They're very literal. So teachers from Latin America, tell me in the box right now, do you feel the same thing is happening in your country, that people can read superficially, they don't understand what they're reading very well, they don't get figurative language? Yes? Do you have the same feeling? I mean, you're dealing directly with students, you know other people. Yeah, you have this problem, right? Exactly. So that's a major problem. So even though this is good news, it's kind of like fake news because it doesn't give us the big picture. Okay. All right. So now we're approaching the end and you will still ask me questions. So what can you do? What can we do to promote reading and to improve the quality of our readers? Well, there are lots and lots of research, lots of studies showing that we can do it by basically doing one thing only. We can promote extensive reading, so read more, but not it's not just read anything. Just read lots of fiction and nonfiction, literary books. Okay, so this one, a meta-analysis showed that compared to those who did not read, okay, so in sum, the available research to date suggests that extensive reading improves students' reading proficiency and should be a part of language learning curricula. So here's the thing. For the brain to learn, the brain has to use prior knowledge. So if we learn more and more complex things, we have to rely on the things we already know. And the best way, or one of the best ways to build this kind of repertoire is through reading, extensive reading. And that means reading books. So we have to salvage reading. Yeah. So my question here, going back, and then we can move on to questions. And I'm going to show you some graded readers as well. My question here to you is, and hopefully I will give you a good answer. What can we do? What do we do given this scenario? I think we don't have to be as extreme as this guy who is a French neuroscientist, Michel Demouget, and he is the author of Screen Damage. And the second book in the series is actually Faites-les lire, make them read in French, right? And he asks, why do the great Silicon Valley gurus forbid their children from using screens? Did you know that there has never been such a sharp decline in cognitive skills in human history? And even though he's a bit too extreme, I think, I mean, it's not about removing screens completely. No, it depends on the age, it depends on the purpose. But we can and we should be using screens to promote more reading. Okay. I mean, we can still work with physical, printed paperback books, right? But we can also use ebooks. We can also use screens to actually promote reading. And one way that I think we have to do it is that even though it's hard, it's desirable. This is related to Robert and Elizabeth Bjork's concept of desirable difficult. It's sort of like going to the gym. No pain, no gain. Reading is hard. Reading is not so natural as we might think, as we saw, because of our evolutionary history. So we have to insist, we have to promote, we have to encourage. But it just because it's difficult, it doesn't mean it's not good for you. It's like going to the gym, you feel the burn a little bit. So it's working, right? Desirable difficulties. Remember this. This is very important. Now, the thing here is, how do you do it? I think the best way for you to do it really is through graded readers nowadays. So here's an example of this graded reader, which is a classic and you can find in the eFutures portfolio, right? The Ugly Duckling. What is the Ugly Duckling final message? Let's see. I mean, everybody knows this one. What is the final message, everyone? Come on, tell me. I'm sure you read this one. I'll give you a couple of seconds. I can hear some dogs barking now. Okay. I hope you cannot hear them. So, to accept yourself, or we can all grow to be the best version of ourselves. The true beauty is inside. Amazing, amazing contributions. Exactly. This is a classic. You can find it in eFutures portfolio, along with 1,200 titles. And that's the way I see we can promote reading. Go to the classics. Some of the classics are timeless. That's why they're classics, right? They have such a powerful message that I'm sure students, if they get in touch with the stories, they will love the stories. But you know what? If the classics are not good enough, somebody mentioned here comic books, right? Graphic books and yeah, so graphic novels. So start there. Start there. Look at this, the power of comics, using comics and graphic novels to support literacy. Comics are a gateway drug to literacy. I like this one. 3 ways graphic novels benefit reading skills. Access to comics can encourage children to enjoy regular reading. And I am a big fan of eFuture portfolio, the comics. So we have school adventures, my favorite, oh my God, have you guys ever read Vera and the Alien Hunter? This is amazing. And I think this is a way to actually promote reading by tapping into students' interests and curiosity. They already know, they are familiar with certain things, the genre. That's a good way for you to get started, to get them hooked on the drug. I like this literacy drug. Or Magic Adventures, another comic from eFuture. Those are very potent ways for you to get your students to read more. Okay, so very quickly, and I think we will have 5 minutes for questions, but very quickly, are you still paying attention? I want a yes or no. Well, if you say no, you are also paying attention. So let's see. Yes, 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 yes. Everybody paying attention. Great. So I wanted to show you this. What do we do then, based on everything I've been discussing with you? This is a very cool resource at eFuture that I think it's brilliant, really. Nowadays, because kids are very into this digital era and in screens and gamification and all of that. I think one of the possible solutions is you can use that language of gamification and digital platforms to seduce students into reading, and eFuture has a meta library that is really amazing, that basically allows students to live inside this universe with their avatar. And then as they read more and more and more, they unlock certain things that will, give them coins so they can trade for accessories, they can play, and then they can get points, so there are quizzes and missions. They can use AI. So this is a very good example of how AI can be used positively, right? And I think the most important message here is this system, the flow system. There's a lot of voice and choice. So the students find the perfect book, they listen. So it's not just reading, but they can also listen to aid the reading part. Again, reading is different from listening, but listening can help comprehension, and then that's important. So they can be done at the same time. Own their book, make their voice heard, and then win by unlocking things and going on missions and winning, actually winning, right? So I think this is a good way for you to do it. After all, folks, the final message here is, I don't know if you knew the story of Phineas Gage. Anyone here knows Phineas Gage? The thing is, Phineas Gage was a railroad worker at the turn of the 19th century in the US. And he had a very bizarre accident. So he had a beam, this metal beam, that he used to trigger an explosive device. Actually, it was gunpowder. And he created a spark. And then they were opening way, to build this railroad. I think somebody put too much gunpowder in a hole, and then the explosion was so strong that it actually projected this beam, this metal rod, through his skull. That's a terrible, this horrible, accident. So it actually went through his head. It took his eye. It made a hole in his skull, right here, his forehead. But nothing happened to this guy. When the doctor came, he was there. He remembered who he was. He didn't seem to be less intelligent. But later on, they found out that his personality had changed, so he became more aggressive, more impulsive. He couldn't control, his impulses. And that's a very interesting story, because it shows us that the prefrontal cortex, which was the chunk that was part of it was removed in the accident with that metal rod, right, has a lot to do with controlling our behavior, inhibitory control, impulses, and it has to do with executive functions, right? And so the story behind his story is a story told by this man, a neuroscientist from Portugal, Antonio Damasio. He talks about human emotions. So, my final message here really is that reading a classic or a modern novel or comic book, or a graphic novel or whatever, literary, whatever, actually gives us more empathy. It actually helps us put ourselves in someone else's shoes, it helps us look at the world through the eyes of the protagonists, of the other characters. It helps us humanize ourselves even more, be in touch with our emotions. And this is what we are losing, that magic that Carl Sagan talked about. We're losing that because we're losing readers. Last year alone, the statistics showed that 51% of the Brazilian population admitted, they said that they don't read a single book, not even one book a year. That's tragic. That's terrible. So, my message is, let's salvage reading by helping our students through the language that they understand, platforms, gamification, comic books, graded readers at their level. Let's salvage reading by promoting reading that becomes that gateway drug onto heavier drugs, onto more complex literature, because we have to get people back to reading. Otherwise, we will become less intelligent, less empathetic, less in touch with our emotions, and less able of doing what we have to do more often, critical thinking. Okay, folks. I think I have no more time for questions. I'm sorry. As a teacher, I think I tend to speak too much. But that's it. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope that was an enjoyable talk. All right. Make sure you get in touch with me if you want to talk about this through eFuture, or follow Learning Cosmos Substack, and you will find my blog and my podcast. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. It was a pleasure.